The first thing they told me about Bellwether Reservoir was that it had no island. They did not say it like a warning. It was just one line in a tired man's tour of a place he had stopped seeing years ago. No island. No public access after 10. No reason to leave the control building unless an alarm told me to. If a fisherman ignored the signs, I was supposed to call county dispatch and let them handle it. On my third night, at exactly 2:17 in the morning, an upstairs light came on in a house standing in the middle of the water. I looked at it for almost a full minute before I remembered there was not supposed to be an island. Then I looked again, and there was not. The water was flat and black beneath the windows. The far shore was an unbroken line of pine trees. There was nothing between the two shores except the reflection of a narrow, three-story house with a steep roof and one amber window glowing near the top. The house itself was not there, only its reflection. My name is Daniel Mercer. At the time, I was 36, recently divorced, and willing to take any job that came with health insurance and nights quiet enough that nobody expected me to be cheerful. Bellwether belonged to the County Water Authority. It was small as reservoirs went, built in a narrow valley in 1968, and most of its machinery had been automated before I finished high school. The night operator's job was mostly to sit beside a bank of monitors and confirm that the computers had not imagined a flood. The man who trained me was named Paul Lawson. He was close to retirement and built like somebody who had spent 40 years opening steel doors by hand. On my first night, he walked me through the control room, the generator floor, and the upper gallery where the windows faced north across the reservoir. When he said there was no island, he was explaining the security cameras. Camera 4 showed the boat ramp. Camera 5 showed the spillway. Camera 6 looked north over open water. Anything appears in the middle of 6, he said. It's whether on the lens or a bird close to the camera. Don't invent work for yourself. I remember that sentence because of how carefully he did not look at the monitor when he said it. The first 2 nights were exactly what I had wanted. I logged water levels at midnight, 1 and 2. I drank bad coffee. I watched foxes cross the service road on the thermal camera. At dawn, Paul arrived smelling of cold air and peppermint, glanced at my logs, and relieved me without conversation. The third night, a dry wind had polished the water smooth. At 2:17, the upper gallery brightened behind me. I thought one of the ceiling fixtures had come on. Instead, a pale amber rectangle trembled on the far wall. It was reflected light from the reservoir. That was when I saw the house in the water. It stood upside down in the reflection, roof pointing into the black depth. 6 lower windows were dark. The highest window glowed. Behind its glass, something moved from left to right. I went straight to camera 6. The monitor showed empty water. Through the window, the reflection remained. I raised my phone to take a picture. The screen focused on the glass and showed my own face floating over the darkness. When I tapped the water, the camera hunted, blurred, and finally displayed an empty reservoir. I lowered the phone. The house returned. At 2:26, the light went out. The reflection collapsed without a ripple. I wrote nothing about it in the log. By 6, I had convinced myself the far shore had some old building hidden behind the trees and the conditions had bent its reflection across the water. I knew enough to know that was not how reflections worked, but not enough to replace the explanation with anything better. Paul arrived 7 minutes early. He read my log, then looked out the north windows. The water had begun to wrinkle in the dawn wind. "Quiet?" he asked. "Quiet." He nodded, but he did not hand the clipboard back. "Anything on 6? A moth?" For the first time since I had met him, Paul smiled. "They love that camera," he said. The next night, I brought binoculars. At 2:16, I was already in the upper gallery with the lights off. The far shore was a black seam. The digital clock on the wall changed to 2:17. Nothing happened. I waited 20 seconds, feeling embarrassed in the dark. Then the reservoir became still. Not calm. Still. The little ripples stopped in the middle of their movement. The red aviation light on the communications mast stretched across the surface in a perfectly straight line. The reflected sky darkened until it looked less like water than an opening. The house appeared all at once. This time I saw more of it. White siding gone gray with age. A porch running along the front. A narrow stone chimney. The upstairs light was already on. I lifted the binoculars. The view through them showed only black water. When I lowered them, a person was standing in the lighted window. She was too far away for detail, but I was certain she was a girl. Small shoulders, hair hanging straight on either side of a pale face. She held one hand against the glass. With the other, she lifted something beside her head. The beige emergency telephone rang in the control room below. I nearly fell on the stairs. The telephone sat on the oldest console in the building. It had no dial, only a red indicator bulb and a cloth-covered cord that disappeared through the steel desk. Paul had told me it once connected the control building to the gate room inside the dam. A newer intercom had replaced it in 1994. The old line had been cut somewhere behind the wall. It rang again. I picked it up. At first I heard only a low electrical hum. Then a girl said, very clearly, "Is the red needle moving?" Her voice sounded small, but not frightened. She sounded like someone repeating a question she had been told to ask. I looked at the wall of instruments. Most of the old analog gauges had been disconnected. 3 remained alive as backups. Their needles rested in green bands. Which needle? I asked. The line crackled. Mr. Vale said not to ring unless it moved. Who is Mr. Vale? He is downstairs. Somewhere behind her voice, a bell rang once. It was not the bright sound of a telephone. It was heavy and distant, a single iron note that seemed to travel through water before reaching me. The girl inhaled sharply. 9 minutes, she said. The line went dead. I ran upstairs. The reservoir was moving again. The house was gone. The clock read 2:26. In the morning, I asked Paul about the telephone. I tried to make the question casual. I said I had bumped it while cleaning and wondered where the other end had been. He set his coffee on the console. You pick it up? For a second. Hear anything? Static. He pulled the receiver from its cradle and held it to his ear. His face did not change, but the muscles in his wrist tightened. Old copper picks up weather, he said. I thought the line was cut. It is. He replaced the receiver very gently. Then how does it pick up weather? Paul looked at me for a long time. Daniel, this job can be good if you let it be small. Watch the live equipment. Log what the county pays you to log. If old things make old noises, let them. He walked out before I could ask what he meant. I should have listened. Instead, I went to the county archive. Bellwether Reservoir had buried a town with the same name. I knew that much. The visitor sign near the boat ramp had an old photograph of a church steeple and the usual soft language about sacrifice, progress, and water security. The archive told a less polished story. Bellwether had been home to 400 people, a lumber mill, a rail siding, and a boarding house called Vale House. The county bought the valley in parcels. Most buildings were dismantled before the dam closed. A handful were burned during a fire training exercise. Vale House was supposed to have been demolished on September 14, 1968. There was a photograph clipped to the demolition order. It showed the house from my reflection. 3 stories. Gray-white siding. Porch across the front. Narrow chimney. In the highest window stood a girl with straight dark hair, one hand against the glass. Someone had written 2 names on the back. Thomas Vale and his daughter, Ruth. The demolition order was stamped incomplete. The next folder held engineering logs from the week the reservoir began filling. Most were typed carbon copies. One page, dated September 17th, was handwritten. 2:08 a.m. abnormal rise behind temporary diversion wall. 2:12 a.m. gate, 3 indicator entering red. 2:17 a.m. warning received from North Telephone. 2:26 a.m. gate, 3 opened by T. Vale. Below that, in different handwriting, someone had added, no casualties. No structural damage. Temporary instrumentation fault. The town had officially been empty for 3 days. But a newspaper from the following week carried a small notice about 5 missing laborers. Another mentioned a woman and child who had not arrived at relatives' home in Oregon. None of those names appeared in the reservoir history. Ruth Vale was not listed as missing. She was not listed anywhere. On my 5th night, the telephone rang before the house appeared. 2:17. I answered on the first ring. Ruth. Silence. Then the girl said, Mr. Vale says the needle is stuck. Your father? He says it only looks red because the lamp is red. I stared at the live backup gauges. Intake pressure, reservoir elevation, gate position. All green. Ruth, where are you? Upstairs. He told us to wait upstairs. Who was us? There was a soft sound on the line, like many people shifting their weight in a room. The ones who missed the bus. The heavy bell rang once behind her. 9 minutes, she said. What happens in 9 minutes? For the first time, fear entered her voice. He opens it. The line died. I looked through the upper window. The house was in the water, more distinct than before. Every downstairs window was filled with people. They stood shoulder to shoulder in dark rooms, all of them looking up toward the surface on which I stood. At 2:26, the reflection jerked sideways. For 1 second, the entire house seemed to be pulled toward the dam. Then it vanished. An alarm began sounding in the control room. Gate 3 position mismatch. The computer showed the gate had moved 4 millimeters and stopped. That was less than the width of my little finger, but Gate 3 had not been commanded to move at all. I acknowledged the alarm and called Paul. He answered before the first ring finished. How far? He asked. I had not told him what was wrong. 4 millimeters. He was quiet. Reset the position sensor. Do not go below the generator floor. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Why not? Because I'm telling you not to. He hung up. The gate moved another millimeter. The emergency telephone rang. When I answered, no one spoke. I heard water moving through a large room. Beneath it came a slow metal strain. Then a man's voice, close to the receiver, said, "It only looks red because the lamp is red." I dropped the phone. The access door below the generator floor was supposed to require 2 keys. Mine opened it by itself. Beyond it, a concrete stairway descended into the dam. Red emergency lamps painted the walls and sections. The air smelled of wet stone and hot metal. I took a flashlight and went down. The service tunnel curved beneath the reservoir. Pipes ran along one wall. On the other, white mineral deposits marked hairline cracks in the concrete. The deeper I went, the more the building changed. New conduit gave way to old iron boxes. Printed safety signs gave way to hand-painted numbers. At the third landing, I found a window. There could not be a window there. I was inside 40 feet of concrete with the reservoir on the other side. The glass showed a dry street under a moonless sky. Vale House stood across it, right side up now. Its upstairs window glowed. Ruth was looking directly at me. She raised the telephone beside her face. The maintenance handset on the wall rang. I answered. "The needle is moving now," she said. Behind me, an analog pressure gauge trembled at the edge of its green band. As I watched, it crossed into yellow. How do I stop it? Ruth looked away from the window, towards something inside the house. He cannot hear us from downstairs. Who? Your father? Either of them. Footsteps sounded in the tunnel above me. Paul came around the curve carrying a tool bag. He looked at the impossible window, and his shoulders sagged. You answered it, he said. It was not a question. What happened here? He put down the bag. My grandfather was Thomas Vale. The name settled into place so neatly that I hated myself for not seeing it. Lawson was Paul's mother's name. Vale was the name he had buried. He was the night gate operator when they filled the reservoir, Paul said. The diversion wall started failing. The gauge warned him, but opening gate 3 would have flooded the lower work camp. Keeping it closed would have sent water toward the North Road, where the last residents were waiting for evacuation. He had 9 minutes to choose. And Ruth. Paul looked through the window. The girl had not moved. My mother. I felt cold in a place that had been getting warmer with every step. She survived. She was never in the house. She was on the last bus with my grandmother. That is what she told everyone. That is what she told me. The pressure needle entered red. Somewhere deeper in the dam, the heavy bell rang. Paul flinched. The county is running an automatic gate exercise tonight, he said. It was scheduled for 3. The controller is early. Gate 3. He nodded, then shut it down. The main control won't take the cancel command once the local sequence starts. I have to pull the drive fuse in the gate room. Ruth said not to let him open it. Paul's expression hardened. That thing is not my mother. From the handset, still against my ear, Ruth whispered. He said that last time too. The tunnel shook. A crack opened above the impossible window. Clear water threaded through it. ran across Ruth's reflected face, and fell to the floor at our feet. Paul grabbed his tool bag and started down. I followed. The gate room was a round chamber crowded with machinery. At its center, a steel drive shaft disappeared through the floor. The old brass warning bell hung near the ceiling. Water already covered the grating beneath us. A motor engaged below. The sound was less like machinery starting than a ship pressing against ice. Paul opened the control cabinet. Inside, 3 ceramic fuses sat behind a mesh guard. "When I pull this, the brake may release," he said. "If the gate drops, run uphill. Do not stop for me." "That is your plan." "It is the plan we have." The drive shaft turned. On the wall, the gate position needle lifted from 0. Water burst from a seam beside the cabinet. Paul shielded his face. The tool in his hand fell through the grating. The motor continued turning. The maintenance handset rang on the far wall. I waited to it and answered. For a moment, all I could hear was the same machinery, but through the telephone it sounded distant, as though it were operating in another year. Ruth said, "He cannot hear us until you use the bell." I looked up. The warning bell's rope had rotted away, but its iron striker hung beside it. Paul shouted something I could not hear over the motor. I climbed onto the cabinet and reached for the striker. The first time I swung it, I missed. The second time, the bell rang. The note passed through the chamber and into my bones. Every light went out. In the darkness, the motor stopped. Then another bell answered from somewhere far above us. Then another, farther away. Soon the whole drowned valley was ringing. Not one bell. Dozens. Doorbells. School bells. A crossing bell. The small bright bell above a shop door. They sounded through concrete and black water, each one announcing that someone had been waiting to be noticed. Emergency lights flickered on. The chamber was no longer round. For one impossible second, Paul and I stood in the front hall of Vale House. Water streamed down the wallpaper. Men and women crowded the staircase. Their clothes hung heavy and dark. At the top stood Ruth, holding a telephone. Beside her was another Ruth, older, wrapped in a traveling coat, one hand gripping the banister. Paul stared at the older woman. "Mom." She did not look at him. She looked at the younger version of herself. The girl offered her the receiver. The older Ruth began to cry. "I was on the bus," she said. The people on the stairs turned toward her. "I was on the bus," she said again. The house lurched. The front door blew inward, and black water filled the hall. I woke on the service tunnel stairs with Paul face down beside me. The emergency lights were on. Water rushed around our boots, toward a floor drain. Somewhere below, the gate motor was silent. I pulled Paul uphill until he started coughing. At 2:26, every alarm in the control room cleared. The official explanation came 3 weeks later. A void had formed behind the Gate 3 chamber during the original dam pour. The automatic exercise raised pressure just enough to crack a conduit and short the local controller. My decision to ring the old mechanical warning bell had, by coincidence, vibrated a corroded emergency contact closed and engaged the brake. That is what the report said. The county drained the reservoir by 40 feet for repairs. They found the foundations of Vale House on the Old North Road. The demolition crew had removed only the upper structure before the early flood. Around it were the remains of a temporary camp the county had insisted was empty. They identified 7 people. They did not find a child. Paul retired before the repairs were finished. I visited him once. He said his mother had confessed something 2 days before she died. She had not been on the bus when the diversion wall failed. She had been in Vale House with the workers and the families who missed the evacuation. At 2:17, she called her father in the gate room. He opened Gate 3 at 2:26, sending the first surge directly through the lower floor of the house. Ruth survived because the current carried her through an upstairs window. She was found downstream at dawn. Her mother taught her to say she had been on the bus because the county paid survivors to sign statements, and because Thomas Vale could not bear to admit whom he had chosen. "So it was your mother calling us," I said. Paul looked toward the dark television across his living room. "My mother was 91 when she died," he said. "The girl on that phone was 12. Bellwether hired a private company to monitor the dam remotely. The control building is locked now. Camera 6 points at an empty mudflat where the reservoir used to be. There is no island. There was never an island. But the last morning I worked there, I stood in the upper gallery while dawn spread over the drain valley. On the mud below, the foundation of Vale House made a black rectangle. Rainwater had collected inside it. The water reflected a room that was no longer there. In its highest window, a light was on. I watched until a small hand reached up and switched it off. I wish that were the last time I saw it. Months later, in my apartment 2 counties away, I turned off the kitchen light before bed. The room went dark. In the black window over the sink, my reflection remained lit. Behind me, a beige telephone began to ring.